So we're almost a week out from the Coldplay-gate scandal, which I assume the whole world's heard about by now, but where the CEO was caught essentially on camera with his VP of HR and apparently having an affair. And he was exposed to be Andy Byron. And what's fascinating, perhaps, is that I used to work with him. Back in 2008, he hired me. He was a sales director for a company called Vericenter, data center outsourcing company. And he also went to Providence College, where I went as well, though he was a couple years younger. But very typical Providence guy, very typical great sales guy, tremendous sales skills, knew nothing technically, even kind of bragged about that fact that he was just focused on selling the product and would bring in the subject matter experts, the IBM sales model. And yeah, the guy was unbelievable salesman. But at the same time, you could just tell. He could look you right in the eye, ask how you're doing, how was your weekend, but you could just see into his soul, but you could almost see there was no soul there. And I don't think he ever burned me directly, but I just always kind of knew he was on that sociopath stage. And this is just a casual opinion, but I'd even say it to his face. I think there's a lot of therapy there that he needs, and often of a lot of sales guys like that. And he always said he was going to be a CEO, and ultimately he became one. And fun fact, a lot of CEOs are just top sales guys or former top sales guys, and often maybe shady sales guys. And, it's like a lot of leaders. They certainly have their flaws. Look at Trump. No matter what you think of him, you should acknowledge the guy is in desperate need of a lifetime of therapy. I'm sure he had not the warmest upbringing, and I suspect that's the case with Andy as well. But yet, I just read the article talking about his neighbors calling what he did disgusting. And hey, I'm not defending it. I heard another guy say not only horrible husband, but horrible father. What I'll say there is I was in the office one Saturday morning, being the go-getter I am, catching up on stuff. He came in with his two sons, stopped in on the way to taking him to a Red Sox game. And who knows about the marriage? They could have had very much an arrangement at this point to stay married for the sake of the children. Often people stay married through the kids graduate college. I personally know a few people like that. I also personally know at least one other VP of HR that slept with their CEO. It's not uncommon for that or for people to have affairs in general. I mean, in some regards, it's amazing. It's still such crazy news. Obviously, this story is salacious for many reasons. But, what is more human nature is the affairs for the sake of variety. What's really not human nature is monogamy. It can work, but only when there's a tremendously great fit mentally and emotionally, and when people don't settle. Often the case of people marrying their high school sweethearts, etc., without really going out in the world and making sure they're the right one. And that I could go on and on about that. But every time someone settles, that means the person they were supposed to meet is going to have to settle as well because they're never going to meet them. But the point is, I have a great level of empathy for Andy. And not because I work for him, but because other than that I can recognize that he's dysregulated. And on a similar note, I just watched the sentencing of Brian Kohlberger, who was responsible for those awful 4 murders of the roommates in Idaho. But that guy's clearly a psychopath. And there's a fine line between sociopath and psychopath. Psychopath more is prone to criminal behavior, of course. But they both are extremely dysregulated. I'm looking for a quote here. Psychopathy is also antisocial personality disorder. It's characterized by significant dysregulation in emotional and behavioral patterns. Kohlberger himself actually Googled for sociopathic traits in college student. And can psychopaths behave pro-socially, which turns out means behaviors that can benefit others or society as a whole and can encompass actions like helping, sharing, cooperating, and showing empathy. So I'd like to think that believed he was seeing if he might be capable of being a good person. So this is a guy that desperately, desperately needed help. Never defend his actions. I know I'd be just as enraged as his family, those families were if one of my loved ones was impacted. But it's interesting that not an ounce, almost not an ounce of empathy was shown. One family member said she forgave him. Not saying I advocate that either, and I have no idea what I'd feel. But I do know one friend of one of the victims, she got up there and she basically bullied the guy. She, said, don't try to convince yourself you mattered just because someone finally said your name out loud. You were pathetic. You were a joke. You were a loser. I mean, she wanted to make him feel as small as possible. And, she basically summed up a lot of the reasons why he did it. And if we continue to purely have this treatment of criminals without showing any empathy and just completely vilifying them, calling disgusting, it's not going to help for future victims. So I'm not going to go on about that. I'm no expert, but I've learned tremendous amounts of empathy through the recovery process. I certainly haven't for the like of drunk drivers, in no way defending them, but I see their mistakes for what they are, mistakes. Empathy means trying to withhold judgment, which can be a tricky thing to do. Our brains are used to categorizing and judging at lightning speed. And I'm not advocating for unconditional empathy. And certainly in these cases, certainly the one of murder, it's awful. At this point, you can do nothing but lock him away. But as we say in my world, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. But it's very hard for people to step up and take responsibility if we're vilifying their predecessors. So I guess I'll leave it at that for now. Always welcome feedback. Oh, and I'll add by ending, but saying, I mentioned this about things like drinking and driving and just drinking in general when you shouldn't be. It is a compulsion. The very definition is an irresistible urge to behave in a certain way, especially against one's conscious wishes. And for the people out there that think you're perfect, the people out destroying people in the comment section, I would liken it to put your cell phone across a room and see how long you can go without picking that up. And unfortunately, people with various disorders, that's the same struggle they face, even if it means something on a completely criminal level, or not on a criminal level, even on something like an affair that might destroy their lives and destroy their families' lives. So the point is, empathy can go a long way. Empathy is intuitive, but it's also something you can work on intellectually through effort and practice, which again, luckily, we are the luckiest. Those of us compelled to do the work. The work works, and I've gained a tremendous amount of empathy through this process that I never had before. I used to just want to lock up criminals and throw away the key, and now it resonates with me when things, even predators, and they say, well, they were also, abused as a child. So what? I used to think. Now I understand that more. And if they never got help, if people couldn't speak up, and people just vilified, who's going to raise their hand and say they're feeling that compulsion if all society does is vilify them and shows no level of empathy and shows no understanding and attempt to figure out how we can solve this going forward? So there's a lot of self-perpetuation of these acts by society. So I'll leave it with that. I didn't keep in touch with Andy, or at least lost touch with him. I'd love to reach out with him now and understand what he's going through. And for all we know, he could have, I don't know about his drinking, level of addiction. It could be sex addiction. Who knows? I hope he actually has checked himself in somewhere where he can get at least a level of therapy for the next 30 days and hopefully ongoing for life. I have a feeling he hasn't really gotten that to this point, like so many others. All right, Stronger Sober. Please like, share, subscribe. Thanks.